Hello, and welcome to the Overcoming Podcast with your host, Adriana Lewin. Before we jump into today's episode, if you could please kindly subscribe to this podcast, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at _Adriana_Lewin. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast episode of the Overcoming Podcast. I'm super excited to be here today and to bring on our guest, King Jones. King Jones is a co-owner of Carolina Family and Maternal Counseling. He specializes with couples and men, especially those dealing with postpartum and trauma. Welcome to today's episode, King. I'm so excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'd love to dive in and just get to know a little bit about you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your specialty? You know, I said that you specialize with couples and men, especially with postpartum and trauma. So can you just help us learn a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah. So got here because initially after grad school, interestingly, started working more with kids. Worked in a day treatment facility, so kids who couldn't be at school, during the day, working with them, and then dabbled a little bit on the corporate side of mental health, and working with a managed care organization here in North Carolina. And then about a year and a half ago, that job ended and joined my wife, who started her practice 5 years ago. She started the practice because when we were pregnant with our second kid, she realized that she was dealing with some postpartum stuff, and just realizing, the special need for therapy in that realm as well. And so as she started her work with postpartum moms, starting to realize the need for support with postpartum dads. And the numbers out there, are 1 out of every 10 dad is dealing with a postpartum mood disorder, and that's just what's reported. So those numbers are probably higher, because us guys like to think that we need to be tough and have it all figured out, even though we don't. And so I joined again the practice about a year and a half ago to cover that area, work specifically more with the men, as well as getting some couples training. I've completed level 3 training of Gottman, and so I do Gottman work with my couples, but also, if postpartum stuff is coming in there, I'm able to address that in the couples realm as well.
Wow. So 1 in 10 men experience postpartum issues, which, being a therapist, and this is not my area of expertise, like I've never come across any of that information because it's not really something that's talked about. Even in grad school training, I don't feel like that was something that was addressed, that men are also going to have mental health issues that really pop up, Oh, sorry, that's my phone. So I just find it interesting that 1 in 10 men have issues. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what those issues tend to look like?
Yeah, I think where the stereotypes at least tend to go, right? That if you hear about a postpartum mood disorder, the one that comes to everybody's mind is postpartum depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or the horror story sides of postpartum psychosis, where that's where the really tragic stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what shows up more with men is anxiety, right? Like, how am I going to provide for this kid? Like, I am so underprepared. Like, I don't know what to do, or my marriage is no longer the same as it was, and just kind of the danger, catastrophic spiraling that goes on there. Now, that's not to say that men don't get postpartum depression, because they certainly do, but it tends to drift a little bit more towards that anxious thoughts. Am I going to be able to handle it? Men also do have like I am going to be such a horrible father. I am not, cut out for this. Things are not going to work out well. So some of those things are what we see.
So I'm bringing a little bit of pop culture in for a minute. I just finished
Sure.
watching I just finished watching Firefly Lane on Netflix. Like final episode, I guess, of it, episode 2. And there's an episode where um Kate Malarkey's like, I'm pregnant. She tells her person, right? I'm the worst with names, so I think his name was Jack for some reason. We're just going to say his name is Jack. Maybe I'm bringing in a different pop culture, but she's like, I'm pregnant. And he takes off on a bike and he doesn't tell anyone where he's going. He is in his head. There are so many scenes where I'm like, I just loved watching his facial expressions because it was just the fear was written in his face, right? Like, am I going to be a good dad? Oh my gosh, what am I getting myself into? So then he goes to visit with his dad, and his dad apparently was like really abusive and really absent. And so he's like, I don't ever want to be like you, dad. And then he's able to go back and he's just like, I just never want to be like my dad. I'm going to be a different type of dad growing up. And so that was just really interesting because I think that's like that, a very common theme with men too, that when they want to, when they realize they're going to be parents, it's that sudden realization of like, okay, what kind of a parent am I going to be here? Like, what is that going to look like? And then taking that look into um, what your relationship is like with your own parent or like, parental figures, your paternal figure. And so I'm curious, do you get a lot of people that come in without the realization? They just know I'm anxious, like I'm going to be a parent and I'm like freaking out and don't make that connection. And then like, so what does that look like for y'all, I guess?
Yeah. So, where I've seen it, actually, one of my more recent clients, dealing with that, it's um, he called because he's expecting twins, but he already had a son, and he realized after he had his son that that's where, like, oh, this is a thing, like, for guys too, and he managed to kind of get through it, kind of limping along, so to speak. But then through an organization called Postpartum Support International,
Mm-hmm.
PSI is abbreviated. Their website is postpartum.net. Um, he found resources there, and we're listed on that website. And I was like one of two male counselors in North Carolina who have gone through the training. And so that's how he found me, even though he lives, 2 hours from me. Um, the beauty of telehealth.
Mm-hmm. I
um,
know. Well, I'm just amazed
rec-
that he even went out of his way to look up postpartum. Like, I feel like I wouldn't have ever told my husband, go look up postpartum, because I
yeah,
always associated that with women, postpartum depression, which is commonly associated with women. So I'm learning something new here. I know.
and it's a better term too is peripartum mood disorders, right? Because it's not just after kid gets here, right? Like, I mean, especially the anxiety portion that's building up. There's that excited anticipation, but there's also the, what the heck am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to handle this? And with this particular one, client, we were able to talk about where things went wrong the first time, but then also remind them is, yeah, but here's what you figured out,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, like, yeah, you stumbled through it, but you are a good dad, and here's the proof, right, of how you're a good dad. And it's very CBT focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's recognizing, all right, what thought are you having, but let's challenge that with what proof. Like, the very first thing, one of the first things we talked about, and he's like, I'm recognizing I'm starting to spiral, and these thoughts are coming up again, that I'm a terrible dad, I'm gonna mess up. And I was like, well, here's proof right away. It's like you recognize this thought was happening, and so you sought help, and so therefore you're a good dad, right? Because you're realizing you can't do this solo. And so, and he's like, yeah, haven't thought about it that way, and
Yes.
like just really see, like, it's one of those times you see that visible shift,
Hmm.
like where the light bulb goes off in their head. It's like facial expression changes, and like just, yeah,
Yeah. It's
really.
like, when they say negative neurons basically connect with negative neurons, and you can get stuck in this negative thought pattern. And the minute that you have something or someone interject and say, here's a positive thing, when you're able to look at that and say, wow, I really did. Like, I'm not going to be this terrible parent because I am trying to show up differently. And that makes me a good parent in and of itself. It's like such a relief for them, I'm sure, right? To realize, like, "Ugh, it's okay if I make mistakes. We're going to fumble through this, but at least I'm trying."
Yeah, yeah. And I think both men and women need the reminder when it comes to peripartum issues. It is okay to take a few minutes to take care of you, right?
Hmm.
Because taking care of you is taking care of your kid. Um, Frequently give the analogy of the mask on the airplane, right? Before the flight goes off, the flight attendants are like, if you're traveling with a child, put the mask on yourself before putting on the kid. And it's very, similar thing. And like, and part of it's reassuring, parents and educating them, just on child development. Like,
Hmm.
for example, if your kid's getting kind of, oh, I think most parents, if not all parents, have had the moment where the kid is upset and just will not stop crying for whatever reason. It is okay to put your kid down in the crib, walk out of the room for 5 minutes to collect yourself, like,
Hmm.
and then come, and care for the kid, because it's better to help you get regulated, because kids learn how to regulate from their parents.
Hmm.
When um all of my, I shouldn't say all, but most of my child development and child brain development stuff is from Bruce Perry, who's close to you out in Texas,
Yeah.
with the child. And he talks about that, when kid gets upset, parents, when they first hear that cry, we also get a little not agitated, but we get alert, right? Our
Hmm.
stress levels go up. But then we go, assess the situation for our baby, figure out what's going on, and then pick them up. And, do you need to be fed? Do you need a diaper change? Whatever thing is, address that need. And then, we end up holding baby close. Baby hears our heartbeat, and it's a steady beat, feels and hears our deep breathing. All right. And as we
Hmm.
start to regulate and calm down, baby calms down with us. Right. And so teaching, parents that, like, hey, remember this thing. Like, it's okay if you get a little escalated and a little irritated, but take that few minutes to get yourself regulated, so you can help baby co-regulate.
The
Um, yeah.
co-regulation. Oh my gosh. I think that's something that I've had to learn through my parenting. Is there are times that, I can do that well. And then there are times that you're just like, I have to set aside my own emotion so that I can literally co-regulate this child. Like, breathe in, breathe out, like provide them the close proximity and comfort, and just breathing in, breathing out, just to help them co-regulate even when I am mad. And it's like it and it feels so strenuous, count like unnatural to not be able to sit in that emotion for a minute, to be like, I'm so mad, but I have to like be the co-regulator. It's not easy, but yes, it definitely
But
is helpful.
I frequently tell people talking about that, um, to my dad and my sister. Apparently, when she was, I have one younger sister, but when she was an infant, and my dad is a family physician, um, she was in that state, right, where she just would not calm down. And so my dad did put her down in the crib, walked out of the room. But he told me later, it's like he had that thought where it's like he understood why parents, some people end up throwing their kid across the room. Like he didn't condone it by any means,
Mm-hmm.
but like he's like, I get it, like that stress level is just, so high. And so we have to recognize that that can potentially happen, right? And my couples and or individuals, when they are expecting their first, like I am pretty upfront. I was like, you're going to be exhausted, you're gonna like, generally speaking, the first 3 months can be like great but also miserable at the same time because you have no sleep,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay, right? Like prep now, that um to expect, and so that way when it does happen, it's not like, okay, like this isn't permanent. um it sucks, but it's not permanent. And I also frequently use what, when my wife and I were expecting our first, one of the classes we went to, um they had us hold an ice cube.
Oh my
And
gosh, they did that to us too.
yeah, right, and it's just, then they don't tell you how long to hold it, it's just hold it as long as you can, and then they tell you to hold it for a minute, right? And like when there's a finite amount of time to it, it just helps make that shift, right? And obviously with pregnancy, it's mainly to help mom with the
Mm-hmm.
um but like I tell people, generally speaking, this is roughly the amount of time, right? It's not an exact science, but you do know it's limited, and um yeah, you will get through it. And so it's, be patient with each other, be forgiving, um but you can do it. And so kind of building that confidence aspect of it as well.
So men who are struggling with the postpartum or peripartum, I guess, type um mood disorders or mood swings and however you described it,
If you
issues.
want to be, you can just say PMADS, because it's peripartum mood anxiety and disorders. So
Okay. So we know there's anxiety. What I find working with men is, I can't say all of them, but most of them are not connected to the emotion. They don't understand what they're feeling. They just know they like have all this energy and it might come out as aggression or frustration or anger. But most of them aren't going to be like, I'm so anxious, right? They're just like, I just have so much on my plate. I have so much going on. So like what does that look like for men? Are they often coming just because of like depressive type symptoms, anxious, like awareness around the anxiety, or just a lot of like
uh, yeah,
anger?
with the peripartum stuff, it is the anxiety. With the other men who come in, um a frequent one is, I'm just so overwhelmed
Overwhelmed, yes.
with what my life expectations are, right? Like I could definitely go on a whole separate rant about how terrible corporate culture is, with like, you need to work all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the unspoken expectations, you know um one of I'm in the Charlotte area, and Bank of America has a big, headquarters here. So lots of people, lots of people work for Bank of America or Lowe's Home Improvement. Their headquarters is in the area as well. And um, you know, people who work at Bank of America, they've actually shifted where like their paternal and maternity leave packages are actually pretty good. Like the
Mm-hmm.
dads can take months. I was like, I worked in the mental health field and they didn't even give me 2 weeks parental leave until 6 months after my daughter was born. And so I couldn't take it. So,
That's
you
mind
know,
blowing.
yeah. I mean, I could take PTO. Yeah. Like I could use my
Yeah.
holiday leave, but, wasn't a designated bucket. Um, but even though the company has 3 months, there's this kind of unwritten rule that if you are at this certain level, while you technically have access to it, you better not actually be taking it, right?
Mm.
And dealing with those unspoken expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and and really dealing with those frustrations with clients is like, yep, that isn't it isn't helpful.
Isn't that so funny?
You know,
Like corporate is over there going, we offer men 3 months off for paternal leave. How amazing and progressive are we? But as soon as you walk through the door, because you're like, we get 3 months off, they're like, you better not take those 3 months.
and the thing is, I think nobody would actually say it, right?
Right.
And if either I went to actually Bank of America, they would deny it left and right, and but it's kind of like, just, yeah, we do need you to work, or okay, yeah, on paper you have it, but you better be checking in like periodically,
Yeah.
um, to make sure. Or and the other thing is, maybe nobody ever said that,
Yep.
right? But just because of the go 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 go, men have convinced themselves that that is what the expectation is, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that if they actually went back and said, no, I am legitimately going to take this 3 months off, like what would happen?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. So maybe I should also give Bank of America maybe a slight benefit of the doubt that maybe if it was actually challenged, but yeah, but just dealing with that and how to have, like, just deal with that anxiety or frustration, really. um and two, dealing with the other unspoken, like, expectation, right? The benefit and curse of having um work from home options right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, you can work from home, so you can clock in at 9 o'clock and get some 9 o'clock at night and get some stuff done. It's like,
Ugh.
well, no.
Yeah.
I do have to have boundaries, for what's there, right? And that, I think that's definitely a big thing I work individually with, is like setting boundaries, right? And so it's like, okay, every now and then maybe you do have that one thing that you have to work later, but don't make that the exception, not the rule, right? And so it's helping them get to that point, which easier said than done. um Especially with, yeah, how some companies are. So,
So they show up to your office with a tremendous amount of overwhelm. Do you ever see people come in with anger, like just irritability? We'll just say irritability, right? I'm not
yes.
angry. You're irritable. um,
Yeah.
I was gonna
And I
say
think
with
that,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Well, I was saying, it's like, and yes, they do, but it comes from different places, right? And so, um one, client may be, um basically, son was born with a heart condition and died a month later, right? And
Mhm.
so his older kids, right, like, just dealing with, like, he's trying to deal with grief and the trauma of that loss,
Mhm.
but then also parent, his other kids, like, that ends up losing his temper, right? So
Mhm.
that's part of it, and it's kind of in the background. Or, yes, some dads are stressed because of all the work stuff. So by the time they get home, their fuse is gone. Like they have no fuse. And so just the slightest bump, they explode. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or some of my couples, right? The husband's like, she just doesn't understand all the responsibilities that I have to do, and I don't have
Mm-hmm.
time. And so it kind of creeps in there, and the couples work is definitely where it's a little harder to work that in, because individually I can call it out. That's why you came in here for, was to help realize what's going on. If I say it in the couples context, it's like, well, you're siding with my wife.
Oh, I know. I
Like,
know.
no, not the goal. It's the, help you guys get to a better place where you said you didn't want to be. um and so kind of working at it from that approach is how I have to get to it. And some I can be more direct, others I have to say, hey, remember when like when we first met and you said this is what you were tired with? Well, here's part of why it's happening. So talking through those things.
So what about you kind of touched briefly on grief. Um, do you want to share a little more about your experience with helping men who are grieving the loss or death? Let's change the culture around saying passing away and loss. The truth is it's death. Um, so talk a little bit more about grief, how it shows up with your men.
Yeah, some it's pretty explicit, like meaning it's blatantly obvious. Like I am just sad all the time. Um, and I will say the dads who I've lost, but the primary thing we've done is EMDR work through that. And um, yeah, so where they were, it would be one guy, like he went back to, like he had a period of time off for that, but he went back to work. And then he went back to work, and just the stress of work, he was like, oh, I am not ready to deal with all of this. This is too much to deal
Mm-hmm.
with. And so recognizing that the grief was just making him overwhelmed because he didn't have the bandwidth to deal with the other stress. Um, Another was just, anytime seeing an infant, right? It's that snapped back. I was supposed to have this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't. Um, and yeah, working through that. And another, some families are currently still dealing with it because it's still so new. Like
Mm-hmm.
they prepared a room at home for baby to come home to,
Mm-hmm.
because it's still so fresh, can't deal with that room.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's harder. um, and so they're constantly, reliving it, kind of constantly in the midst of that
Yeah.
sadness and stuff. And yeah, so it looks lots of different ways. One of the things Bruce Perry talked about too is trauma being the great deceiver, right? And so it looks like anger, it looks like inattention, it looks like depression, and so you have to get those backstories right to figure out what's going on. Um, and we started to talk about this too with men who aren't able to recognize that emotion or where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
One of the important things I like, tell me about your upbringing. Like, what was your relationship with your own parents like? And where are those things? How does that affect you on the day to day? Because realizing, yeah, there may be something that there may be, not always, right? But there may be something from your own childhood experience where how your parents handle things, or caregivers handle things that kind of taught you this is, a maladaptive way to respond. And so addressing those things with them.
So, in my experience, because I'm married, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
In my experience, just kidding. But even in general, like with men, I find that like you mentioned briefly, the need for them to, I guess the best way I can say it is like men have this deep sense of responsibility. And I think that not
Yeah.
only are they talking about financially, but I also have noticed that they take on the role of the fixer, of the one who isn't supposed to be showing emotion, to keep everybody, everything stable. Like, so they take on the responsibility of the emotions as well. So when you're working in this world with men and the peripartum issues, then are they also coming to you with this same belief system that the woman is the one who gets to do most of the grieving, like, or the struggling because, she's the one who carries the baby, then the postpartum, it can actually be the hormonal imbalances. Like, there's a lot that the woman might feel entitled to, whether she says I'm entitled to this or not, but it's just like the way that, she's grieving, and she might grieve a little more externally and more, you know, that's her way of showing what's going on, the way that she processes. And then you've got men who feel this need for responsibility to keep it all together. So are they coming to you with issues where it's like, my wife doesn't see that I'm also struggling emotionally and mentally?
I think where I see it, um, I think most, especially with the couples who have lost, but like whose
Mhm.
child has died, um, that there is a certain expectation that yes, you should have some grief, right? Like
Right.
that's normal. Um, and some of their wives would probably say, I'd actually be worried if you weren't grieving.
Hmm.
I think the men I've worked with, I think that's a very good thing, right? That their wives recognize that they should be grieving on some level, but where it bleeds over is it continuing, ongoing, and is it preventing you um, from moving on, right? And so I
Mm.
think some people are getting stuck um, in their grief, right, for
Mm.
what's happening, and not, yeah, it's kind of like, actually, at least two of my clients, it's because the wife said, hey, like, you're not over this yet, and we're kind of nearing the point that, like, well, you may not forget it, and like not, ever, you should, you will have sad feelings when you think about it, but like you're kind of still stuck in that
Hmm.
immediate, talk about with the MDR, it's, you are trapped in that past trauma, and all the feelings that you felt then are still coming up now, right? And you're not able
Hmm.
to move on, so it's helping them get through that part. And it's like, yeah, it was a crap experience, that you had,
Yeah.
but it is permanent. um yeah, and I think too, actually, where there is there's some fear that I can't let go of my kid, because if I let go and move on, I'll forget them,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So that's a hard part to move through as well.
That's
And
that.
especially too, if they want to talk to more kids,
Oh my
right?
gosh. Yeah.
So
Yeah. That would be, I mean, that sentence, applies to all of grief, right? Like, that's an area that I specialize in, is grief. That's commonly um a sentiment. Like, if I let go of this feeling, then it's like I'm forgetting them. Like, it isn't like they view their grief and the intensity of their grief as a connection to that person. It's like, well, let's take a minute here and you can still grieve appropriately and you can still enjoy life, right? Like grief is always going to show up. And then, oh darn, I lost my train of thought because there was another thing that you mentioned that I was like, I wanted to talk on that. Um, but I know like we like my family, we went through childhood cancer and there was a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety. And I know my husband, like I assumed the role, took a break from being a therapist, and my job was to be the caregiver primarily, right? And my husband had to be the provider, make sure that we still had things, so that we still have a job so we could pay for all the treatment and stuff. But um in my world, in my sphere of, of influence in that regard, there's a lot of people who struggle, a lot of men who struggled with feeling that they can show their emotion with their spouses, even if there wasn't a loss. And then even afterwards, it's like they've recognized that it still shows up as a quick temper. Like
Mhm.
it's not that they're angry, they're just, um, what's a good word for that? They're just quick to temper or quick tempered. There's another word I'm looking for and I'm drawing a blank. Um, it must be my stomach who's growling at me, telling me you need food so your brain will work.
The irritable what was coming there, but that's not quite it either, which is okay.
Irritability. Yeah,
But
no, it is irritability. Thank
irritable,
you. Yeah, it shows up as irritability because most people can just be like, oh, irritability. They're related to like he's cranky, right? Crankiness, but it does show up that way, and so I'm wondering if that's kind of what you see as well on your
yeah,
end with your
and
population.
certainly, like, and I think the irritability again can come from that, and I also see it again from I am so tapped out from what work is expecting of me that I'm also not the most pleasant person to be around when I get home. You know, um, and it's because we're stretched right so thin that like I have given it all and I'm tapped out, right? And so I don't have that buffer, right?
Yeah.
My gone. Um and so not able, I am at capacity. And like I just yeah, I can't parent. Um
So
or as the meme frequently see, I can't adult anymore.
yeah,
Um
adulting sucks.
yeah.
Can I go back to being a child, please?
Yeah.
All this responsibility. Um, you know, what would you say to the women population about the men that you work with? Like things that we need to remember when we have a partner in this season of life.
Yeah. Um I would say generally like there's a reason behind the action, and it's while it may feel like he's maybe ticked off at you, that's not necessarily it, right? There could be some other underlying things there, and especially if it's the families who are in that peripartum period. And I guess I should have defined peripartum from the moment you are pregnant to at least a year. Sometimes some people even consider 2 years after birth, right?
Okay.
That's the window of time we're talking about. They could be dealing with stressors related to anything in that window, and they can come up anytime in that window, right? Like it could
Hmm.
be it is 6 months old and then like it hits you. um I would one, I think just everybody needs to be aware of the website postpartum.net, because there is a ton of resources out there, including online support groups for men, who are
Awesome.
all through, and there are support groups for moms too. Um, but they are, those resources there. Um, they host a warm line where, if you call in, they get you connected to a local meaning in your state, um,
Okay.
expert who is to the
I'll make sure
resources.
I'll make sure and link that in there on the show notes for postpartum.net. And so you would say there's something going on for a reason, basically, right? There's more to the story that they should be checking out the resources at postpartum.net. And is there anything else that you think women should be aware of?
um it's, your husband, and or partner, and it's, you may have to do some gentle, reminding, um and it's okay to even just seek out support for yourself, right? So my partner's not open to getting support for himself yet, but what are some things that I can do? Again, postpartum.net is a great place for that. um and strategies for helping get those conversations going, right?
Okay.
And they can explore just some of those local resources themselves, right, for
Mhm.
their partner to have it. So when we're ready, we're ready.
So with the men that you work with, obviously you would say to add postpartum.net into their
Yeah.
resources to tap into. Um, is there anything else that you would like to say to the men who listen to this podcast?
I'd say, you're not weak for asking for help. That is definitely the biggest misconception. It's, I mean, and I struggle with that myself, right? Like,
Mhm,
and with whatever role, whatever level, be it school, job, fill in the blank,
mhm.
I have gotten to this point. So there's this unspoken expectation that I'm supposed to be able to do it completely by myself. It is still okay to ask for help, because I frequently got myself into my own situations where I didn't ask for help and the situation got a whole lot worse than it needed to be, than if I had just been humble enough to ask for help in the first place.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time today, King. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and you've taught me quite a bit more about the postpartum, peripartum, you know, areas of mental health that I wasn't really familiar with. So I really appreciate your time and your expertise and the stories that you've shared with us so that hopefully they can help the listeners find someone like you, if not you. um, and so, yes, if somebody wants to learn more about you, what is the best way that they can find you?
Yeah. So our website, which unfortunately is a mouthful, but it's Carolina Family and Maternal Counseling.com. I am licensed in both North and South Carolina. So if anybody lives in either of those states, I'm able to work with you. Um, yeah, and that's the best place. We are on Instagram, CFM underscore counseling, um, and on Facebook if you search for the practice name as well. So those are our main places.
Great. I will make sure and add all of those um, links into the show notes so that you can have access to those and find out more information about King Jones. And I'll even link postpartum.net. So make sure you take a look at that if something that he spoke about today resonates with you. So I just want to say thank you, King, for joining me today. And I hope you and the audience has a great day.
Thanks. I appreciate it.